Okay, now we've got one of my favorites, 30-year former federal prosecutor, Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, great being with you, Brian.
So another raft of legal news when it comes to Trump and others in the Republican Party this week. Let's start off with this. New York Attorney General Letitia James announced a $250 million lawsuit against Trump, Don Jr., Eric, Ivanka, and some other Trump Organization associates. Now, you'd mentioned during our last interview that the Trump org was as good as gone. So I do owe you that dollar. I do owe you your betting limit. This is ostensibly an open and shut case. Like, we know Trump inflated his asset values to derive benefits on loans, and we know he deflated those values to lower his tax burden. Is there any potential defense for Trump here? Like, is there anything that he could hinge his hopes on?
No, this is not a triable case. The Trump has already tried to settle, and reportedly, Attorney General Tish James said, "No, we're not going to settle." The only settlement offer that I would accept if I were sort of on the prosecution side or on the attorney general side of the case would be $250 million and a ban from, holding offices or being on the boards of any New York companies or corporations, which is precisely what Tish James is seeking from Trump, Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka, plus Weisselberg and Jeff McConney, two other, high officials in the Trump organization. That's the only acceptable settlement offer, because not only does Letitia James have the goods, as can be seen in that 220-page complaint, she has the witnesses who will deliver those goods. Because when you read through the complaint, it is replete with phrases like, and then Donald Trump personally directed X, Y, and Z. And then Donald Trump personally certified the following representations. And then Donald Trump told his staff to do X, Y, and Z. She's got the goods. Donald Trump loves to try to insulate himself like a mob boss from that kind of evidence. Well, Tish James has that kind of evidence.
So if she's got the goods and she's overseeing this civil case and Alvin Bragg was overseeing the criminal case for what I believe is the same matter, and that case seemed to be on ice, where does the disconnect come here? How does she have something that's such a home run that she can, wage a $250 million lawsuit, and yet Alvin Bragg is over there laying off prosecutors that were working on this case?
Yeah, the simplest explanation is something smells fishy in Alvin Bragg's office. The reason I say that's the simplest explanation, Letitia James made it clear in both her court filing and in her press conference that there was criminal conduct that she found by Donald Trump. And she is referring that criminal conduct to the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office and to the Internal Revenue Service for further investigation. And what we also know is that Alvin Bragg's own top prosecutors told him, we have enough evidence to indict Donald Trump and we have enough evidence to win a conviction. When you bookend those two things and you put Alvin Bragg in the middle, something is not right. And it doesn't seem to be the evidence. It seems to be Alvin Bragg's decision-making abilities.
Is there anything about Alvin Bragg that would lend itself to this idea that he would be willing to go easy on Trump?
Nothing that I know of, but I have been hoping that we could find some really hard-hitting, aggressive investigative journalists who will dig down to see, for example, who were the biggest campaign contributors to Alvin Bragg's campaign. I'm not accusing him of being corrupt, but I sure would like an answer to the question, why did he seem to make an unsupportable prosecutorial decision and kill the investigation into Donald Trump?
Going back to this civil case then, is this the kind of thing where Trump just closes up shop in New York and then reincorporates in Florida and just kind of gets off scot-free? Like, what does Trump actually stand to lose here by virtue of losing the Trump Organization?
It's a great point, Brian. He stands to be run out of New York on a rail because he will not be able to do business in New York. But the Attorney General's action doesn't sort of move beyond the borders of New York. So he can go elsewhere. I think where he will likely find himself is in criminal court year after year. I believe he'll be indicted. I believe he'll be held accountable for his crimes. Really, the open question to me is, when he is ultimately sentenced to serve a period of confinement, does our government, does our judiciary have the appetite to have him serve that sentence in a confinement facility, or will they sentence him to home detention, which, Brian, to me, always felt like sentencing somebody to stream Netflix for a
Right.
year and have DoorDash food delivered to your house.
Right, not exactly a punishment if you're being banished away in your 11,000 square foot home on the water. On to another Trump lawsuit. This one regarding the DOJ's investigation into stolen documents at Mar-a-Lago. You had Judge Cannon's order granting Trump everything he asked for with regard to the special master. Then his handpicked special master and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which included 2 out of 3 Trump appointees, they sided against Trump. Is that it for this tactic by the Trump team? You know, did his long game of trying to delay just get derailed after like 5 days?
Yeah, Trump's criminal defense team is really not very good at this lawyering thing because they've painted themselves into a corner. Now, let me first answer your question. Is this it? Probably not, because Donald Trump will appeal and appeal and appeal. Now, they will be frivolous appeals. There really is no law. There are no facts that would support a successful appeal. And I certainly hope when he tries to appeal it up to the Supreme Court, they refuse to accept the case for review, because there is no constitutional principle to be reviewed by the Supreme Court. But, this is really a delicious development, because Team Trump said, we want a special master. Judge Cannon, with no lawful support for her decision, said, you got it, Mr. Trump. Then they said, we want Judge Raymond Dearie to be our special master. And Judge Cannon said, you got it, Mr. Trump. And now Judge Dearie is trumping the Trump defense team at every move. And he's doing it precisely the way a federal judge should be doing it. Think about it. He was directed to review the classified documents and other materials that were seized by the FBI from Mar-a-Lago for any possible privilege. Now, let's set aside the frivolity of that proposition that there would be any protected, privileged materials in these classified documents. But he said, okay, this is what you, Team Trump, want me to do. First thing I need you to do is certify what documents, if any, Donald Trump declassified. Much to my surprise, Brian, Team Trump came back with, no, we're not going to do that, Judge Dearie. And the explanation they gave, which is mind-blowing for criminal practitioners, is because that would damage our ability to defend Donald Trump in the future if he is criminally indicted. That's usually not what defense attorneys say when they're responding to a judicial request. So that is an indication that even Team Trump thinks Donald Trump is sort of on his way to a criminal indictment. And then Judge Dearie just made a second demand, said, okay, I need you to certify what, if any, documents you claim the FBI planted. Why would Judge Dearie ask that? Well, he is being tasked with going through all of these materials that were seized from Mar-a-Lago for possible privilege. But if the FBI planted them, well, guess what? Then they weren't at Mar-a-Lago, and I don't really have to review them for privilege, do I, Donald Trump defense team? So I want you to certify what documents, if any, you claim are planted. Guess what? Trump's defense team can't answer that question either, because they would hurt their litigation position in any future defense of Donald Trump. Here's what they may be doing right now, Brian. I'm not going to predict this or even bet a buck on it. They may be huddled together saying, okay, one, we really blew it by making this special master request, because they're moving through it in a timely manner. We're not even getting the delay we sought. And it looks like all of these things we're being asked to do are hurting our litigation position in the future. We may need to withdraw our request for a special master because it's hurting us so much more than it's helping us.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, what happens if you've granted this special, if you've been granted this special master, and then the special master is trying to do his work by virtue of what you've asked him to do, and then you don't let him do that? I mean, are we at an impasse? I mean, something's got to give right now. I mean, right?
Well, yeah, we're not at an impasse, because Judge Dearie can say, fine, you don't want to answer all these questions, then I'm resolving every potentially contested issue of fact against you. And, I've gone through Judge Deary's 7-page order. And here's what I love, because he threatens, appropriately so, that I may need to hold evidentiary hearings on this, which means I'm going to need testimony from Team Trump's side and from the government side to resolve any contested issues that I need to resolve before I can conduct a professional review of all these materials. The last thing Donald Trump and his lawyers want is an evidentiary hearing on any of this stuff, because all of their claims are bogus.
Let's go for the low-hanging fruit here. Glenn, how long has declassification by mind control been a thing?
I still don't believe it's a thing, even if you do it in the get smart cone of silence. I don't think it's a thing. And if it is, well, then Joe Biden in his mind has already reclassified everything. Right. So, but here's the beauty of Donald Trump continuing to run his mouth. Donald Trump in 2019, I believe, declassified some documents, and he did it because he thought it might make the Dems look bad. Turns out he was wrong. And he went through the proper process. And those documents he declassified got stamped declassified, just as they are supposed to be. So what does that prove?
It shows that he knows how to do it if he wanted to.
Of course he does. So his claim to Hannity, maybe I declassified these, in his mind, a prosecutor hears that and tucks it away, because that's what we call an admission by a party opponent, which is an exception to the hearsay rules. I would introduce these statements at Donald Trump's trial to prove that he knows how to do it. And it's an admission that he didn't do it by having to resort to, maybe I did it in my mind.
Even if he did declassify via brainwave, it wouldn't matter, because the charges that the FBI laid out in the search warrant didn't hinge on classification. So isn't this all a red herring anyway?
And that is, you just quoted the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals opinion when they used that very term. This is a red herring. Thank goodness the judicial adults are back in charge, Judge Deary and the 3-judge panel that just smacked down Judge Cannon's unsupportable ruling, telling the federal government to stop investigating the crimes of Donald Trump as they pertain to these classified documents. That's insane. And I'm glad the judicial adults are back in charge. And I'm also heartened that 3 of the 4 judges that we're talking about, 2 who were on the panel of the 11th Circuit, were judge appointees. 1, Judge Deary, is a Reagan appointee. These are Republican appointees, and they are standing for none of Donald Trump's nonsense. But let me go back to declassification. The 3-judge panel just said he has presented zero evidence that a single document was ever declassified. And in the next breath, they said, but it's a red herring anyway, because he's alleged to have stolen these documents, whether classified or declassified. He still stole documents that didn't belong to him. They belong to the federal government.
Let's switch off to another darling of the Republican Party, and that's Ron DeSantis. He just shipped 50 migrants off to Martha's Vineyard. Those migrants introduced a class action lawsuit against him, and they were alleging that they were induced by virtue of him exploiting their basic needs. In DeSantis's own statement from his own office, he literally says that these people were hungry, and he explains that while having suggested that he did them a favor by getting them on that flight to a sanctuary state. Did he just screw himself by basically validating their case, by basically validating this idea that he exploited their basic needs by giving them, $10 McDonald's gift cards to get them on that plane?
Yeah, he's a little like Donald Trump in that his every statement is an admission that could be used against him in court in the future if anybody deigns to prosecute him. And, I was, when I saw what he did to these asylum seekers who were here actually following the rules we set for them by surrendering and seeking asylum. So they were here lawfully. And when I saw that he tricked them, he duped them, he deceived them by false promises to get on a plane and move from point A to point B, immediately what came to mind for me was kidnapping by inveiglement. It's a word that we don't often use, we don't often hear, but it is a way to kidnap somebody. Usually we think of kidnapping as, you hit somebody over the head, tie them up, throw them in the trunk of your car and take them to a house somewhere and do horrible things. Yes, that is kidnapping by physical force. But if you just read the federal law, 18 United States 1201, kidnapping by inveiglement is also kidnapping. And it's when you trick or deceive or make false promises to somebody in order to get them to move from point A to point B, because at that point, their movement is not voluntary. And I will say I was tickled when I saw on the Daily Show with Trevor Noah, he played my explanation of kidnapping by inveiglement. Yeah. And that is precisely why I challenged the Department of Justice to take up this kidnapping investigation, because it directly violates federal law. When you do that to somebody and in the process, you move them across state lines. That's what makes it a federal offense.
I'd love to see accountability for Ron DeSantis just as much as anyone else. But what do you think the likelihood of that, on this front would be? Because I'm not trying to have a redo of the Mueller situation here. And by the way, just even the fact that I have to ask this, it really is a sad testament to the times here, because, it's so blatantly obvious that was done. We have all of this evidence in broad daylight. And the fact that just me sitting here thinking, okay, well, I don't know, maybe there's a 5% chance that anything like this would happen because this guy is a Republican in power is really does show the two tiers of justice that we have in this country, and how these Republican politicians are so successful in terms of not facing accountability when they've committed these crimes so blatantly out in the open.
So first of all, there already is a criminal investigation opened by a local law enforcement office in Texas of this. I actually think that our Department of Justice Criminal Division and our Department of Justice Civil Rights Division are already digging into this, because what Ron DeSantis did is he committed crimes. He preyed upon the most vulnerable among us in our country. And I actually think that the chances are fairly good that there will be a robust criminal investigation into what Ron DeSantis did to these human beings, and that he might even be charged. Here's the thing. Look at some of what Merrick Garland's Department of Justice did in bringing a civil rights prosecution for those who killed George Floyd, a civil rights prosecution for those who killed Ahmaud Arbery. He didn't have to do that, and goodness knows the Trump Bill Barr Department of Justice would not have done that. And Merrick Garland's Department of Justice has opened pattern or practice investigations into the potentially biased law enforcement practices of multiple city police departments. They're not going to take the kidnapping of asylum seekers by a government official lightly or lying down. That's my prediction.
What is the punishment for this kind of a thing? I mean, if they do move forward with some type of indictment or charges, what is the punishment for the charges that he would face?
Kidnapping carries with it 20 years and up to life under certain circumstances. So am I hopeful that if Ron DeSantis is prosecuted, he'll spend much time in prison? That I'm not hopeful of. But if you want to deter other people, including government officials, state government officials, from kidnapping migrants and asylum seekers, this must be addressed.
Would the fact that he's a government official give him any legal cover as an individual? So kind of like an LLC would give individuals cover. Does the fact that he's working on behalf of the seat of the governor of the state of Florida, does that give him individual cover?
Yes and no. There is something called sovereign immunity and qualified immunity, where if you're a government official acting within the scope of your official duties, you might enjoy some immunity against being dragged into court. That is generally a civil protection you have, not a criminal protection. But the bottom line is, kidnapping asylum seekers is not within the official duties of the governor of Florida.
I could ask you questions all day, but we'll leave it there because I'm sure that you have a lot of people that want to ask you questions like this. So Glenn, thank you so much for coming on. If anybody wants to hear or see more from Glenn, check out Justice Matters on YouTube with Glenn Kirshner. That's Glenn. Glenn, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Always great to be on with you, Brian.